So from a customer service perspective, from a distribution and transmission perspective, Eskom was one of the best in the world, not just in Africa, in the world. Our customers pay less for electricity than they would be paying if they were only using power from the grid. That's the reality. Saving the customer money is in our DNA. It's why we exist. But on average, our customers save up to 65%.
Sure.
On the electricity bill. And then when you sum what they pay us, most of them are anywhere between 50 to 30% monthly savings. The tech we've introduced now will get them up to 90% of the electricity bill.
Sure.
Yeah. I had a very clear view on where electricity tariffs were going, given that they'd already started on that path. You should look at what happened between 2008, I believe, and where we are today. It's massive amount of electricity tariff inflation. So I had a view on that. And it's important to also state that infrastructure had to be built.
Yes.
You had to build those power plants. Then you have the decommissioning of plants, which is going to take place. Keeping them running comes at a cost, whether it's through penalties or whether it's through technology enhancements to keep those power plants running. So when you sum that up, you can already see the price trajectory to what it's doing right now.
Is the internet correct when it says you've raised about $48 million?
The internet is absolutely correct.
Wow. Is there a skills shortage?
Once in a while, we do have, deep discussions about there's a vacuum or there's a gap and we need to find experienced people of this nature.
Yes.
And what we've tended to do is we've then gone and said, well, we now have a responsibility to go and find the next best tier and train them to be what we want them to be.
Do you think it's possible for every house, every home in South Africa to have solar? And today, we're diving into the business of energy through the story of Vincent, co-founder of Wetility. Imagine a world where every home has power. That's the vision driving Vincent Maposa, CEO of Wetility and our guest on today's episode of Behind the Industry. From humble beginnings to raising nearly 1 billion rands to reimagine how South Africa powers up, Vincent is proving that solving big problems like energy poverty can spark big opportunities. This episode is brought to you by Doorways. What were you most drawn to when you were younger? Were you drawn to tech or business or social impact? Because whenever I've read up about your work or listened to you, there always seems to be this deeper reason you're doing what you're doing.
That's a great one. So my childhood I grew up in a middle class home. My father was a railway man. My mom she was a secretary, and then she studied further, ended up being a branch manager for a hardware sort of chain, equivalent of your builder's warehouse, so PG. So you know it for glass here, where I grew up in Zimbabwe. It was famous for many other things, including that. So it was just, confluence of things where my father was a railway man. He ascended through the ranks, and his whole thing was about customers, because that's what he used to do. He was at some point responsible for passenger services for the national railways of Zimbabwe back then. So I'm a middle child, which means I had a bit of free reign over certain things. So there was a lot less scrutiny. And this is post-independence for what was a liberated Zimbabwe in the 80s. So this is first generation Black families that are, starting to embrace what being middle class actually is. And my mother grew up in the rural areas. My father grew up in the city, but in the toughest township that you could grow up in. So, but they were born in the rural areas, all spent some time there. So they were new to this. So my brother, unfortunately or fortunately, had to deal with young adults. I had to deal with young adults who had experience with one other child.
Yes.
So it's important.
It's better.
It's better, right? So, yeah, as a child, I was very focused on firstly not getting into too much trouble.
Why? You didn't want to burden your parents?
I think so. I was also genuinely afraid of them, right? Because they they went to work and came back and had high expectations of everything, of all of us. So I just didn't want to cause too much trouble. But by not doing that, I was actually causing a lot more trouble than I thought I would be. So played a lot of sport, like a lot. Name a sport, I tried it out.
Wow.
If it was there to be tried out, I tried it out. I became quite proficient at cricket, soccer or football to some extent, and rugby. Played that cricket right up to sort of provincial level as a junior. And academically, actually, when I went home recently, my father showed me all my report cards. I was always in the top 5 in my class, always. I found a way. I wasn't particularly excellent at everything except maths. That was just second nature. It just came the way it came. So I remember the one guy I went to school with, his name was Mahmoud Ashmawi. He was Egyptian. So during, Bulawayo was a very interesting place to grow up because whether it was, pre the end of apartheid or something going on other parts of the world, you ended up with this melting pot of expatriates who were in the country. So I remember him being the guy everyone looked to. This is the maths brain in the class. And I was always a decent second. And at some point we were competing properly. But yeah, that was the one area. Everything else was, enough to not
be top 5 though.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember the one, as I said, I was trying not to get into trouble. I got into trouble before you write exams, and this is the grade 7 exam. So the grade 7 exam is what determines, which schools you get to go to. And that.
Really?
Yeah. So the schools don't just, you're picked based on your grades. That's how you end up in the school that you end up in. So, I remember, second term. So second term is like sports season. And that's when I played first team soccer, first team rugby. Something else I did, I think it was choir. So I was deeply invested in that. And I think I was 8th that term, my class.
How your parents lost it.
Yeah, my dad literally lost it. He properly lost it. It was a massive rant, and he was just mad. And I remember I said to him, it'll be fine.
Oh.
There's no need to stress me out and stress yourself out. It's going to work out the way it's supposed to work out. And it worked out the way I thought it would work out, which is, the final exam is a final exam. It's national. So I'm obviously going to take it very seriously.
Your grade 7 finals are national.
They're national.
That is crazy.
You go up against every other child in the country. And everyone writes the same exam. So yeah, I did exceedingly well. So yeah. But I was always very, as I said, the math side was decent.
Yeah.
I was always inclined towards sports and also very artsy. So
choir,
trying to figure out what's happening in the world of art. I think it has to do with sort of maybe that design logic that comes with being mathematical and how you want certain things to be a certain way. And yeah, I always found myself in that space. I was deeply introverted. Well, let's put it this way. I'm still to a very large extent,
Okay.
but I was very introverted. But I think the introversion had a way of coming out as leadership, which is a bit weird because I never put myself out there to lead in any fashion. But whenever there was a leadership vacuum or someone identified that there was one, they sort of picked on me and they said, look, perhaps you can. Sometimes I stepped up. I remember when I was 10, I was captain of the cricket second team for the school. And by the time I was 11, I was captain of the first team, and had nothing to do with how good I was. I was a bang average cricketer, right? But I was very dedicated to trying to figure out how to make the rest of the team work a certain way.
So you identified leadership at a very, very young age.
So I mean, I remember the names of the most talented people on the team. To this day, I remember the name. The fastest bowler was a guy named Fatswa Pilime. Justin Smith was the best batsman. There was a guy named Courage Chifumbu as well, who was from a rival school. was quite decent. We tried to get to our school. So I remember that one of my closest friends, Nigel Tafeni, always used to field it slip because it was, so that's how I used to think about it. And most of the time I used to sacrifice myself in those situations because sometimes to bring out the best performance in people, you have to think of yourself in service of them. And it was ritualistic as well. Some of that involves being the kit man, right? You go and you pick the kit for everyone. You make sure everyone has the right bat, the right pads, their shirt size is the right one. You do that as captain, and that's what you do at like junior level sports. And you make sure that the refreshments are going to come on time. You check on everyone and stuff. So I've always enjoyed that water carrier type of role, and always found that to be interesting. So yeah, I think the only thing is just that mathematical sort of inclination. I carried that over into high school, where in high school I was a bit, I'd say, jaded, but I was floating a lot. I was just like, I was trying to figure stuff out. What I did know,
as per normal.
Yeah, as per normal. I just knew that like I'll get past my O levels and get past my A levels somehow. But I was trying to really understand how certain things worked. So I tried as much as I could to take on lots of things. But as I said, I always had this inclination to being very mathematical. I remember when I was 16, when we're writing our O levels, which is the second set of national exams that you write, the teacher said, we can discuss the other subjects. What I do know is that mathematics, additional mathematics, literature and English, not English language, because English language is about structure and whatnot. And literature and English is what I tended to enjoy, because I had the structure in maths. And I didn't want to be like in there. And so he mentioned those three. I might have mentioned the fourth. I think it was geography, because that's what I enjoyed. And he said, guaranteed A's, the rest, he's going to figure it out.
Okay.
The rest, he'll figure that out. And I figured out the rest. But at that point, heavily involved in public speaking. When I was 17, national debate champion, because I always wanted to offer an alternative opinion to whatever discourse was taking place. And the best way to express that was, publicly, which is where this whole introversion, non-introversion thing comes out. So privately, I'm very, very private and very introverted. I spend more time by myself than most people. But, when there's an opinion to be offered publicly about something of importance, of substance, I will always try to provide an opinion. I enjoy it. I enjoy engaging with people, publicly about very important matters. And that's just how.
So you seem to have grown up being very concerned about, and I don't want it to sound like self-consumed, but very like any child, just navigating life. And I'm trying to figure out at which point, because you've publicly said numerous times that, and I'm paraphrasing, your call to action is energy poverty. It sounds like such a, one would expect, there was no power for most of my childhood, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you said you want to offer energy independence. Okay, I understand there's an analyst background and all of that, but I'm trying to figure out, because I don't think that bug caught you when you're an analyst. I feel like it's a bit late to catch you, because it seems very personal. And
it is very personal, and I'll explain why I think it's very personal. And so I grew up, as I said, in a middle class home in the second largest city in Zimbabwe, and things worked absolutely well. Things worked. The milkman delivered bottles of milk, and no one stole them from outside your gate. And
that would not happen here.
Exactly. And the newspaper guy threw the newspaper over there, and the only issue you had is if the dog ate it. Like, that was how I grew up until a certain point. Right. And the late 90s ushered in just radical change, like radical change. By radical change, I mean, you went from being middle class to, I don't know what's going on. Right. So, power started going out. You could also tell that the quality of life had changed and deteriorated to the point where it was actually quite terrible, right? If I remember some of it and how bad it was. And So when we talk about load shedding schedules in South Africa, what I experienced as a child was there's no schedule. The power's gone. It'll come back when it comes back, right?
Could be
This
days.
is when it could be days, when I was a teenager. And then you then have to downgrade your lifestyle to what, the circumstances suggest you do, right? And at that point, diesel generators were an absolute luxury.
Yeah.
The richest of the rich were the only people that could even think about it. Like, it was not even in our wheelhouse of things that we could think about.
Yes.
So you see that deterioration, and you understand the reasons behind it, right? Which is infrastructure is built, infrastructure has to be maintained, and infrastructure has to serve people. And as your population grows, as the financial fortunes of the people that you're supposed to serve change, and they continue to demand more, that investment has to be aligned with that. It has to be a concomitant sort of action around how do we ensure that basic services are available. I often cite this as an example. When I was young, and when I was young, I went to, primary school, mix. It was 2 primary schools, private one initially, government school. I went to a government high school. So government schools where things just worked, right? I remember when I used to go to church with my mother, the nurse who was, responsible for giving me my first set of inoculations was the same nurse at the tiniest clinic you could ever think about, till I was a lot older. And at some point, she was having a conversation with my mother and literally citing that there is no medication whatsoever at the clinic. Nothing, zero. You go there, at best, if you're lucky, we'll give you paracetamol, and that's kind of it.
Sure.
There's a doctor who would be there, would write prescriptions, and the government would dispense those things basically for free because it was basic, it's basic medication that any child or any adult needs for a cut on their hand, and they need pain meds that are more effective than the standard ones, or bandages, that kind of nothing. It's all gone. So that understanding of what it means to have things work a certain way,
and then
they're not work.
Taken away.
And literally from the time I was probably 15, 16, cooking using firewood became the thing in the city, like in a town. You cook using firewood. You literally light a fire, you cook, and that's it. And if you cook it, if you can refrigerate it, if the power ever comes back.
If it ever comes
back. If it doesn't, you eat basically what's there, and you try and keep it, as, And then what you're cooking as well has changed, right?
Yes.
It used to be, just decent food. Now it's like, okay, this is eating to survive. Then I traveled. I traveled across many African countries. This is more when I was an analyst. And you go to Nigeria, the same conversation. We used to have power, and this stuff used to work. And then, and then you look at the rest of the African countries, Southern African ones for that matter. Zambia, I remember, was also one that we used to look at as Zimbabweans and say, it's unfortunate what's happening in Zambia, right? They don't have power, their kwacha is a weak currency. What's actually going on there? Then when you travel now and you have, thinking about your retrospective views, retrospectively, and now thinking about your now informed position of how things could go terribly wrong. You develop a deeper understanding of what it means to not have that. And then, the stats and the numbers will just tell you that energy poverty is real. Without it, you can't start a business that's sustainable. You can't live a comfortable life. And if you take those 2 things as super important for any person transitioning from being child, student, adult, rest of your life, then you start figuring out ways to solve for that. And then you start getting into the detail, right? Each of these can be delivered however you want them to be delivered, but it will cost money, and each of these has a different cost. And then starting to understand what is the most sustainable or optimal way of making sure that at a minimum there's enough power for people to live their lives and for businesses to continue to grow and support the people that are living their lives. Then it becomes a mission for me to solve for that. And as I've said, like that whole water carrier approach, which is, I'm not going to solve all the problems, but let me try and be the guy in the background trying to do that, and trying to do that honestly with the perspective that it's important.
So if you had to summarize it into one sentence, What is energy poverty?
Energy poverty for me is not being able to be productive because there is no energy being supplied. For me, that's poverty, right? And then the other that's a availability issue. Then the other is not being able to afford it if it is available.
If it is and energy independence?
Energy independence means you have choice on who serves you, primarily because you can afford it. Then you have choice, and you're optimizing for your circumstances, which is it always on, always available? If it's on, should it be cheaper? Should it be should it cost a certain amount of money? And that for me is independence, choice, the ability to pick the provider of that power, the ability to pick when it is provided, the ability to pick how much you pay for it relative to how many suppliers are there and how much are they each going to charge you for it. And you making the decision yourself, as opposed to you can only get it from this service provider at this price and it's only available at this time.
And I'm guessing in Africa, you don't see a lot of energy independence.
Yeah, you see versions of it.
Okay.
And the whole sustainability question becomes one that's relevant. Like, you're using diesel, right, for example, to power home. And it's a single diesel generator, which is probably a prime application when it's supposed to be standby, because diesel generators are sometimes built to be standby.
Yes.
So you're paying for it, you're independent, you're making that decision regardless of what anyone else is doing. But it's not great for the environment, not great for the occupants of your home and your neighbors, because it's a bit noisy and
It's probably also a bit expensive.
Right? So you see that, and you are immediately aware that even that independence comes at a cost. So it has to be optimal as well. Like, how are we paying for this independence? And is it fair? Is it just? That's the other. That's the other question to think about.
And then you mentioned, as you were traveling as an analyst, and I think for some people that don't know your past, you were an energy analyst for Africa for many, many years. I'm curious as to what major trends, major energy trends did you identify in Africa? So maybe top 3.
Yeah, so the irradiation levels across most parts of Africa are higher than the average, the global average, which means that from a energy resource, and this is solar perspective, we have some of the richest resources. It just comes down from the sun, and the sun shines on us brightly, and it's the right level of irradiation required for us to generate power. Africa has a lot of rivers that are not dammed, which means that there's significant scope for more hydro and large-scale hydro. But in the areas where those rivers are not dammed, there's usually other factors that stop that from becoming a reality, such as conflict, issues around, who owns the source of that river and where can you dam it, what happens downstream if you dam it at this particular point, who owns the power generated. So it's territorial issues around that. And then the third one I think we've touched on is there's lots of diesel generators across the continent. And diesel generators are typically a key way of assessing what's happening in the transmission and distribution side beyond what's happening on the generation side. And it's embedded generation. People want to consume power from a source that's on site that they can control. So then, in line with that, you can then extrapolate and say there's a big transmission and distribution issue in the rest of Africa. Yeah.
And so my guess is radiation is the one that sort of made you think of starting Wetility.
Yeah, it was that. And the other thing about it is, as an analyst, I analyzed lots of data. And this is what I always say about my love relationship with South Africa's main power utility is it was at some point one of the best in the world.
In the world?
In the world. Statistically, you can go and research this. It was.
And when you say best, what does that mean?
I think it was best across transmission and distribution and as well as customer service.
Wow.
It was affordable cost-wise
Yes.
as well. So if you think about the legacy ESCOM and the legacy Unix and what they were able to achieve, South Africa had an electricity access rate well above 90, I believe, maybe close to higher than that, way before many developed countries.
Sure.
Because of a very deliberate idea that was formed pre the end of apartheid and post-apartheid, specifically to ensure that every home has a connection to electricity and that electricity is made available. And for you to be able to do that across several millions of households, you need to build solid internal infrastructure and technology to allow that to happen. So from a customer service perspective, from a distribution and transmission perspective, ESCOM was one of the best in the world, not just in Africa, in the world. In Africa, bar none. And even to this day, bar none in Africa, it's still the best as far as I'm concerned. For the scale that it has achieved and what it's trying to do. So, yeah, I think that's how I view, ESCOM. That's how I view the world. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to the question.
Yes, Wetility.
Yeah. So when I looked at Wetility, I thought about how to serve customers well. Customers that draw power from a system.
So was it at a time where you felt ESCOM is not serving customers well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there were many ways to look at that. So one is power availability, but the primary one was cost.
Cost. Okay.
Cost. And as an analyst and as a former consultant, you look at how much it has cost us to build Medupi and Kusile.
Yes.
And it's public knowledge that they cost a lot more than what was initially budgeted. And the principles that govern that is it's cost plus pricing firstly, and the user must pay principle. So ultimately the end user is going to pay for everything, and the end user is myself, yourself, business and the like. So I had a very clear view on where electricity tariffs were going, given that they'd already started on that path. You should look at what happened between 2008, I believe, and where we are today. It's massive amount of the electricity tariff inflation. So I had a view on that.
And you basically saying, because I think some people get despondent that there shouldn't be these tariff increases. So you're saying just looking at the cost of improving the grid, just that was going to make it expensive anyways.
It was going to make it expensive.
Oh, okay.
Right. So that's important. And it's important to also state that infrastructure had to be built.
Yes.
You had to build those power plants. Then you have the decommissioning of plants, which is going to take place. Keeping them running comes at a cost, whether it's through penalties or whether it's through technology enhancements to keep those power plants running. So when you sum that up, you can already see the price trajectory to what it's doing right now. And when a power utility, especially a monopolistic national one, starts to have difficulties in providing the primary thing, which is just making electrons available, then certain departments start to suffer. And the ones that typically suffer are more on the downstream side. That's your distribution, transmission to some extent, and your customer service. So that became important. So in making that decision and naming the company Wetility, we thought about the utility service. The customer must pay for it the way they have been paying for electricity without the current circumstances they find themselves in. So they must pay. But if we ask them to pay a large amount upfront, is that sustainable? Unlikely to be. How are they paying for electricity today? They pay monthly after they use. And they pay an amount which is predictable. It varies on how much they use, but it's predictable. Then the other one was, how much control should the customer have of the technology? Currently, do they control the technology?
No.
Not really. They can flick a switch and they can connect certain appliances. They can rewire their home, but the actual flow of power into their home is hardly governed by them. Then that sort of formed our view on the sort of hardware and software that we were supposed to do. But it came down to customers are going to suffer and it's going to be costly. And once it becomes costly, they're going to have availability issues, which have to do with just delivery of power to where they would like it to be consumed. And at the same time, you have to take a view on economic growth in South Africa. You have to take two parallels. There's what is formal and what we are all saying is anemic. And then there's what is informal and what is also, sort of unquantified. And those two things are sometimes at odds with each other in terms of how you report on them. And as far as I'm concerned, the economy is growing. We're just not tracking it the way we should be tracking it. And there's lots of untold growth that's happening in other parts of that economy. And that part of the economy is the most underserved. So they're going to become more power hungry. They're going to require more power to...
So the informal.
But I like to think of the informal sector as, call it the African sector.
I like that.
Yeah. Or the developing sector, because...
The developing sector. Yeah.
Because the transformation that takes place in that informal environment is quick. A good example of a company that tapped into that and has become world-renowned because of what it's doing in the tech space is Capitec.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. They understand that
the
sector.
Unbanked,
yeah.
The people of a certain demographic and the like. And they have managed to bring those people with them and bring them to the formal economy, if I'm allowed to call them that. But without saying to them, you should be formal. Do what you're doing. We will support you.
We'll help you. We'll enable you.
We'll enable you. And it's important to think about it. So that's the lens that we also, I spent a good 18 months writing all of this stuff down, presented it to a few friends, presented it to my brother, James, who took a look at it and said, maybe you need more time. Go and think about this. And I went back and refined it, started speaking to potential co-founders, registered the business, started working on some of the concepts, in consultation with many people. Many of my friends and family who helped me start the business were involved heavily in just providing advice, providing opinions, and I was just there documenting, water carrying, as I said, and making sure that their thoughts, their ideas were captured in a manner that was going to lead us to start a business, a business that was going to serve people well. Yeah, and then we came up with that. And the name Wetility is literally utility. We combine those, Wetility, which means that we are part of a bigger thing other than, one customer with this, one customer with that. Ultimately, we want to integrate what our customers are providing with the grid and make sure that there's enough sharing of power, that dynamic.
Interesting that you mention integration. Okay, because Eskom has come out, or the streets are saying, or the headlines are saying that Eskom wants people that have solar panels to pay more for electricity.
Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like they're not saying the same thing as what you're saying, because you're saying there must be integration. It sounds like they're saying, no, we want one grid. Is that the correct interpretation?
I think the motivations of Eskom sometimes they are misconstrued because of the context.
Yes.
See, so Eskom's point, which is valid, is that there's solar PV has gone up. People have it on their roofs. They have batteries in their homes. Some don't. And yes, fair enough. That has lessened the burden on their systems or in their capacity during, call it the day when there's availability, massive availability of it. At night when the sun sets,
we all go back to the grid.
So from a justice perspective, and is it just for you to not pay for that power to be available? So there's a fixed amount that you're supposed to pay, which is, call it an availability fee, almost like insurance. It says, if the worst happens, I know I can count on, which is essentially what they're saying. So that narrative, given the context, is construed as something else, which in essence it truly isn't. The interesting thing, though, is that most of our customers, or all of our customers, have a battery in their house as well, which means that they store some of the excess power or the power that was generated during the day in their battery. So they can also peak shave in that.
Which means they can use the backup power.
They can use the backup power. Then, it continues in that part. So I think, just a few days ago, I was on the ESCOM webinar where this was being discussed, and they've waived some of the fees to allow consumers to register their plants. For us, registration is compliance issue. We comply, right?
Okay.
And we are always on that same page. But the fees were high.
Okay.
So they've waived their fees. And their view is we want every plant to be registered so that there's fairness in the grid.
Okay.
We know what's happening and what isn't. But that's more, let's call it on the commercial side.
Yes.
If I'm interpreting it simply. There's a safety issue associated with it. 500 kilowatt system can literally electrocute someone who's working on a power line down the line. If it's not limiting, the flow of energy to that individual. So it's a real health and safety concern for them that some of these systems are quite sizable. And at that size, you could cause irreparable damage to the grid, and an individual could lose their life. So their waiver currently is for systems less than 50 kVA, which are the typical, most households fall below that. Most of our customers are within that bracket. So we do have commercial customers, but we like to stick to systems that are less than a megawatt, basically. But the majority of our customers are residential and light commercial. So that waiver applies to them. So I think...
So when you say register, when you say the plants need to register, you're talking about commercial plants only? Because
no, residential. Every plant.
So it's considered, if you put solar panels...
Every plant on the network
okay.
needs to be registered.
Okay.
It needs to comply.
Okay.
It's important because it's beyond just the commercial reasoning for it. It's also a health and safety issue.
Yes.
It's also safety of your home.
Yes.
So as a significant player in the space, we make sure that all our plants comply. We issue the COC, we go and register it with the municipality. The fees are paid, registered with ESCOM, the fees are paid. The contentious one is, what does it cost to comply?
Yes.
And that's where the PR range has to sign off on it. And the PR ranges typically charge a very high amount. So even from the perspective of the webinar and the people that were there are concerted efforts to make whatever it is that you have to pay reasonable. And that's on the compliance and registration. Then there's the tariff structure, which I believe it's fair to charge a certain fixed amount to allow for fairness in the grid, which is fair. And then the peak tariff becomes higher.
Just the fairness portion, because I think a lot of us sit and think, well, if I'm using less, I should technically be paying less. That's what we think. We're thinking, instead of me watching TV using ESCOM's power or, running my fridge, doing laundry during the day, I'm using solar. So I think simplify it even more, because right now, all we're thinking is, no, I'm using way less. Maybe I only use the national grid for 1 hour when I come back from work. And so I should be paying way less. So explain that.
Practically, our customers pay less for electricity than they would be paying if they were only using power from the grid. That's the reality.
Okay.
And we've made it that way from an engineering perspective.
Okay.
And I think that reality has dawned on everyone.
Yes.
And everyone knows that, whether it's the municipality, whether it's whatnot, they know exactly that.
Okay.
So that's the fact. And there are concerted efforts to make sure, by many players in the industry, to make sure homes pay less, because the mix of resources that they're using within their home to deliver that electricity some are cheaper, some are more expensive. So the weighted average cost or the weighted average price that you then pay should be less. Is lower. What is important is to know that when you're not using power from your own embedded generator, you're using power from ESCOM.
Yes.
So you need to pay for that.
Yes.
And when you pay for that amount, when you sum those two up, is less than if you didn't have power from your own embedded generator. And that's where
that's the truth.
That's the truth.
But the per unit that you're paying to Eskom is a bit higher.
It's a bit higher.
Okay.
But you have to take it in context. It's a bit higher because of their cost base and what they're trying to achieve. They're the national electricity provider, so they're serving multiple interests and they're making sure that that power is available. But on average, our customers save up to 65%
Sure.
on the electricity bill. And then when you sum what they pay us, most of them are anywhere between 50 to 30% monthly savings. The tech we've introduced now will get them up to 90% the electricity bill.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but that's in that context.
Yeah.
I completely understand where Eskom is coming from. They're not coming up with these things to make life unnecessarily difficult.
Yeah.
But the messaging is often, wouldn't say sensationalized because, people sell newspapers a certain way, but it needs a bit more explanation. So I think there's a trust deficit.
Yeah.
And it's this case with anything, right? If you drive on Johannesburg's roads today and you look at the number of potholes, and if, someone came out and said, look, we're going to increase rates in order for us to service those potholes, your natural response would be, are you now trying to penalize me for not driving on your roads?
Yes.
You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So it becomes,
Just to make sure that our listeners understand, what does Wetility actually do?
That's a great question. So we allow customers, residential and light commercial mostly, as well as property developers, to subscribe for a hybrid solar system at an affordable rate.
So hybrid. What does hybrid mean?
It involves solar panels, a battery, an inverter, the switchgear that comes with that. And we offer what is known now as the Beast Bundle, which is you get that Wetility PACE system, which is a hybrid inverter and batteries and the solar panels. You get a smart geyser control from Blentify. You get a free air fryer.
Thank you for the air fryer.
Exactly. And many other things that come with that. You then get the Wetility app where you can remotely monitor your system.
Yes.
You can, the FAQs there. You can get in touch with us if you have an issue. You can actually see how much money you're saving on a daily basis as a result of having a system from us.
Okay.
That app now has, or at least system now has AI mode, where the system is now learning. And in learning, it is maximizing the cost saving to you, the consumer or the customer. And at the same time, also learning the habits that you have, or your habits in the home with regards to consumption of power, and optimizing that to ensure that if there's a power outage, you always have power, regardless of when that takes place.
What does that mean?
It means that
the AI components, because it's very interesting because you're saying it optimizes.
Yeah.
But now I'm trying to understand in layman's terms, what does that mean?
Okay, so simply put, you have a solar system, and you can set, or you can have you can manually set how you want it to operate. And when you set that, if conditions change, your settings are your settings.
Yes.
So say you set it to have 20% of the battery capacity reserved for a power outage. And then that power outage is stage 6.
You need more.
You need more. So you need it to have been set at 50%, set at something else. So what AI mode does in the back end is it looks at all the ambient conditions, all the conditions around or that could affect your system, and dynamically changes the settings. So for example, today, I think it's overcast.
Yes.
AI mode right now is making sure that customers who typically consume a large amount of power between, say, 5 p.m. and 9 p.m., the solar panels are prioritizing making sure that the batteries are fully charged.
Yeah.
If they need support from the grid, they're also doing that, making sure that's the case. Then there are certain areas where it is known that there is a power outage because information is publicly available through trolling social media and or certain websites.
Or official reports. Yeah.
And is also dealing with that and making sure that the customer has enough power to see them through the entire night.
Okay.
So it's almost like with EVs, the issue is range anxiety.
Yes.
So you could call it battery anxiety.
Yeah.
Will my battery last through any set of conditions? And that's what AI mode also does. But in the back end, it learns from viewing your existing data. So if your home typically peaks at 6 p.m. when you get home and decide to, make a meal, and between 6 and 10, that's when you draw the most amount of power. The battery will discharge in a manner that is representative of that, such that you do have power during that time, but also it discharges progressively throughout the night to make sure that if you have a power outage, say at 2 a.m., because you peak again at 5 a.m., you have power at that time.
And the reason why it's optimizing, is it because batteries can't just run at full capacity all the time?
They can. I
Okay.
mean, you can cycle your batteries out, but number of cycles as well is you need to minimize the number of full cycles to preserve the health of your battery over a sustained period of time.
Yes.
You can add more battery capacity if you require. The primary reason is exactly that, is we want to save you as much money as possible without disrupting, how you operate on a daily basis. That's the primary reason.
And then just talking about, continuing on the conversation of AI. Okay, now, AI in the broader energy conversation.
Yeah.
Does this also participate in that conversation? Does it help in any way?
Absolutely right. And remember, there are different types of ways that you can look at AI. Most people want to think about it from a consumer perspective. And
Yes.
what is driving this?
Yes.
But you can apply that to a variety of things. So, for example, the internal processes that lead to the delivery of something for a customer. Super important. So AI in the field operations space is quite critical. Very, very important.
So when you say field, you mean people out there connecting, setting up power, what do you call it, installations?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's very, very important because it just optimizes and reduces waste and makes it a lot more efficient.
Okay.
So a good example is what we are doing with the thing called Zooper for our field services, which is we need to know where every installer is. We need to know how an installer performs over a period of time. So it's learning that. We need to know what we can do to optimize how that installer can perform in the future, and then be suggestive on do this versus do that. So that's like what you're trying to do.
Are you already tracking this?
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, already tracking that. But that's just the data around it.
Yeah.
It's what you then do with it.
With it, yeah.
Right. So, there's all of that takes place. With most bots, they learn, right?
Yeah.
They learn from, let's call it repeated incidents, but also frequency and the volume of those things. And over time, they start to solve some of your field-related issues without human intervention or direct human intervention. So if 50% of the time nuisance tripping is caused by a customer overloading, and you figure out that it has to do with a kettle, microwave, stove, and all switched on at the same time.
Yeah.
You don't need me to tell you that. You can literally be told that it's likely you switched these things on, and as a result, switch that off. Then the cross, from a software perspective to hardware, and it now being able to command the hardware to do certain things is super important as well, which is something that we're rolling out at the same time, which is switch something off, switch something on.
It's like smart power.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot that's happening there. Even in the finance space, you know what some of the things are that are actually taking place, especially in high transaction volume environments, in order for you to just become more efficient and predict certain behavior when you start to see it, and make a confirmed decision on what to do as a result of seeing that pattern.
Yeah.
And then making sure the machine does a particular thing in response to that seen pattern, then stepping away and letting the machine make that decision.
Seems like Eskom would benefit from a lot of AI.
What I know about the engineering prowess of ESCOM is they're definitely doing something in that space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
ESCOM houses some of the smartest, most brilliant engineering minds in the country, probably in the world.
Yeah.
So they're definitely doing something.
All right, just to go back on the, because you mentioned when you had figured out that you wanted to start Wetility, you mentioned you spoke to your friends, you spoke to, family, and then you went on a search to look for co-founders. You actually the second guest on this podcast to find co-founders from your ex-colleagues.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's getting, it's okay, it's a surprise or okay, whatever. But now it's two people. So clearly there's something there.
Yeah.
Why go to your ex-colleagues?
I think the journey, and most people underestimate this. And I'm glad I didn't underestimate it because I didn't know any better. So it's not like people need to trust you if they're going to work with you. And how you build trust is over time, in most cases. And then it almost has a knock-on effect when the people that trust you go and meet other people and say, we trust this guy, and those people trust them, then it becomes something else. So I chose my co-founders from a pool of people that I trusted, who were also very talented and passionate about the problem we were trying to solve, which is, energy independence for everyone, right? And that is important because while building a business, you don't want to spend too much time building trust amongst yourselves when you have no prior, relationship around where you trust each other. It's very, very difficult to bring in a completely new co-founder who you are not familiar with. You don't know their quirks. They don't know how you work. And then assume that you're going to get on swimmingly well. Ultimately, you don't want to be surrounded by people that you get on with all the time. But if you get on with the person on a personal level or on a human level, but also understand that professional differences should not impact that personal relationship, then you go and find them. So I was fortunate that, I spent some time at Deloitte in strategy consulting. When I was at Cummins, when I was head of strategy for Africa Middle East, I traveled a lot. I met a lot of people. I engaged a lot with the smartest minds in those organizations. And I was able to pick the people that I truly, genuinely believed as co-founders would, help us drive the business and get us to a point that makes sense. The alternative is going to find a completely unknown person.
Yes.
And hoping that it works. And I think I'm a prickly enough character to know that it was probably not going to work out.
Okay.
As I said, deeply passionate, tunnel vision, sometimes stubborn about just things. But I also like to be led by facts the majority of the time. So you can already see where if I had gone and picked someone with a very different personality or a personality that just doesn't fit into that environment, right? Then it could be difficult. And what am I passionate about? What am I stubborn about? I'm stubborn about the business. Everything else, I have no opinions on anything. As I said, I spend more time with myself than anyone else. And I like to, and because I'm mathematically inclined, like to base a lot of things on statistics and facts. And so that's it. So if I had found, say, a co-founder who doesn't see the world that way some percent of the time, then would clash, right? And, so it's always important to do that. And I think as a first-time founder or first-generation founder, as Ray Ledwaba, his book says that.
Yes.
As a first-generation founder, I think that's probably the way to do it. Pick some people from your network who have worked with you, who you have worked with, where the trust building is from this point onwards, as opposed to there's nothing starting from scratch. So I think that was
okay. And then I think my understanding is the first the first funding you ever raised as Wetility was from friends and family.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody says that, and it sounds good, but the reality is, I don't think a lot of us have friends or family members that can really give us funding. And also, how does it practically work? Do you just raise it at a braai? You mention, hey, I'm starting this business. Do you do you have a proper presentation? Who are these early believers?
So it's interesting. So, and I like that you brought it up, because there's always this connotation around, oh, you had friends and family that were able to do that.
Yes.
My friends and family are people that are not, in the top 1% of the world in terms of just average wealth. They are not necessarily, they're people that can make that kind of investment. But how I went to these friends and family was firstly people that I had worked with that knew that at worst I would lose their money while working hard.
Okay.
If I was going to lose their money, they would know that I worked very hard.
Okay.
And lost it in the process, but I did work very, very hard. So they trusted me.
Okay. Trust. Okay.
But I also was very deliberate about making it affordable for the friends and family to participate. So I didn't go there and say, look, I'm raising
4 million each.
Right. Collectively, that's about how much they gave
in
the first phase of that. And these are friends I have known for many, many years. So all the people that wrote us a check are people that have known either myself or any one of the co-founders for a long enough time to know that if I give them R1 of my money, chances are I'll get it back. But if that R1 is lost, they're going to be as honest as possible with me about how they used that rand and where it ended up.
Sure.
And that was very, very important. So when I approached them, it was a very casual conversation. This is what I want to do, and I strongly believe in it. What do you think?
Okay.
And some of them said, and we were turned down a lot. Certain, friends and family said, not my money.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we didn't get money from them. But the few that really believed wrote checks. Some of them didn't write checks immediately. I don't have it right now. Or I need to see a bit more traction for me to give you the money. And when they eventually gave us the money, they wrote us the checks, and that made a lot of sense.
Oh, aren't they glad?
I would like to believe they are. No, that they are. I mean, and that's part of the role of a founder and or CEO is you have to do right by those people, and you have to maintain the relationship, and you have to be transparent. Radically truthful and transparent. Because subsequent to that, even after we had raised money, there was a time when we needed more money. And the only people I could lean on were those same
friends
and family to give me more as a bridging round in between capital raises. So you don't get that right if you haven't built that relationship.
It was equity and debt.
Yeah.
So some you paid back, some they said, I'm going all the way.
So the equity was the equity. The debt was shareholder loans.
Okay.
To tide us over when we
okay.
had tough times. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned that you went on to raise more capital. Is the internet correct when it says you've raised about $48 million?
The internet is absolutely correct.
Wow.
But the internet needs to think about how it actually flows, right?
Okay.
So it flows as we continue to grow.
Okay.
So you raise the commitment. The commitment is the commitment. Then you draw under certain conditions. So that's how it actually works. The equity part of that 48 is the equity part. It comes in tranches. You get it. Then you draw on the debt as you continue to roll out systems. So we're almost done with that amount, or at least we've deployed most of it. We're raising again in order to continue to deploy because we're continuing to grow. And that's the reality of it.
I think young people would like to understand at which stage of the business do you decide to raise funding? So, pre-seed in the beginning, you go to friends and family, they validate your idea. Then you got to this 48 million. So at which point are you making a certain number at that point? Do you have a pipeline of clients? How do you know that it's now time to go out there and ask for more money?
Look, it's fortunate as well that when I look at our team, like the current Wetility leadership team, people with a lot of experience. And I would not have been able to make some of the decisions that I have made or we have made if those people did not have the experience. The business or what we're trying to achieve is capital intensive. We know this. We knew this from day one. So raising capital was not an if issue. It was when and how much and how long can we go? Can we keep going without raising it?
Yes.
And that was an issue. So,
and it's capital intensive because
we sit with the systems on our balance sheet.
Yes.
So every system we deploy, we own.
So the solar panels that people are leasing, you actually have to buy them.
Yeah.
Okay.
We own them. So, and then the customers then subscribe or lease and they pay us over a period of time.
Okay.
So when you think about that in that context, every time a customer is interested in having a conversation with us, we're a couple R100,000 lighter every day.
Literally every customer.
Yeah, every day. Like, I look at the ins and outs on a daily basis. It's a couple million rand. So that reality upfront we knew, but we raised it in stages. So we knew we needed to develop a set of minimum viable products, call it that. And we needed to get our tech to a point where it's feasible to start rolling out or for us to start issuing it to customers. And that's where that friends and family round came in. We raised some money from the Innovation Hub, part of Gauteng Department of Economic Development, GGDA. So we raised some money there. So the first system we ever installed was funded by the Innovation Hub. Then we raised money from the Multi-Choice Accelerator, the equivalent of about, at that time, it was about $2 million. But the exchange rate has since gone where it's supposed to go. But yeah, about 20-something million rand at that time. And we used that to start building a book and to develop a business, a team, because all those things cost money, right? You have to move into an office, you have to invite people there, you have to start hiring.
At that point, you haven't sold a single...
No, we had sold.
You had
sold. From day one of the things that I was hell-bent on is proving that their customers willing to pay.
Okay.
So with the 4 million rand, we sold a couple systems. I forget the exact number, but several systems.
So you prove that there's a business case here.
Yeah.
Customers want this. Customers are willing to pay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Then we ran surveys and we asked customers to show interest. And we had several thousand customers who were interested in our product, like keenly interested. So when we were raising, our Series A, which is the amount you're talking about, we had proof that these customers, if we have this capital, will sign up and they will get a system from us. And those are we're rolling those systems out today because we have validated proof that that's the case. But we are also a direct-to-consumer player, which means that as demand goes up and down, customers come to us. We've managed to maintain consistent demand because of the exact things that we were discussing earlier, which is we focus on cost saving. And then we know that making power available all the time is a sort of secondary thing. Because when there's no load shedding, what does the customer require? They require to save as much money as possible.
Yes.
When load shedding reappears or emerges, then they want those two conditions to be satisfied. But satisfying the primary one, which is the cost saving, is important. And that's our narrative. That's what we tell our customers. That's what we tell our internal team. That's our rallying call is we need to save customers money. Right. And that's what we do on a regular basis. So yeah, the decision is really driven by the industry we find ourselves in, the business model, what we're trying to achieve and how we believe we should achieve it. And because of that, it requires a massive amount of capital. And then the rest is really it's a financial structuring question. And David, our CFO, who I met, at the height of COVID. I always remember when I met someone based on where I was. I was at my apartment, and my apartment had, this is all I had in my apartment. I had a couch, a sleeper couch in case someone visited me.
During COVID.
Yeah, I had a table, a desk, I had a chair, I had 2 screens, I had a bed, and I had a refrigerator and a microwave.
Wow.
And my golf clubs, which I did use for during that time.
Yes.
So that was also my sacrifice, because in that, friends and family around, I put in everything.
You were also the friends and family.
Everything I had.
Yeah.
Downsized to the point where I was literally living on next to nothing. So I'm also quite like schizophrenic now about money, because, I always think about the moment when I'm going to need to put in more money in the business, because it's like, it's a thing that I carry from, the times when I had to sell my car, borrow from friends again, to continue to keep the business alive.
And when you were approaching the investors, was it easy? Because when we see the amount, we're like, okay, this must be a slam dunk. The business case must have made so much sense that anybody you talked to just said yes. Did you have any rejections?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of rejections. Look, we had more rejections than we had yeses.
Okay.
But we went through 2 accelerators.
Okay.
We can call it 3. The Innovation Hub was an accelerator. The Multi-Choice Accelerator was an accelerator. The Climate Finance Accelerator was an accelerator.
Yeah.
So, and those accelerators, we were also deliberate about which ones to go through or to participate in.
Yeah, because it could get too many accelerators.
So the Multi-Choice one really made us a consumer-facing brand. We had ambitions of being a consumer-facing brand, but Multi-Choice, what it does in the multimedia space, what it does in the broadcasting space, really made us a consumer-facing brand. And we pride ourselves in, being that, a brand that tries as much as it can to mirror the lives of the people that consume from it.
Yes.
And we face the consumer head on. There's no B2B partnership that is in the background and all of a sudden you end up with our product. We approach the customer with our chest, if I'm allowed to call it that. The Climate Finance Accelerator was really about getting experts globally to participate in mentoring us, putting us in front of the right people. And with both of those, we met some really eminent, interesting people. So recently, I had the fortune of bumping into Ibrahim Patel, who I met as a result of the Multi-Choice Accelerator.
Yeah.
I met him and I went over and I thanked him and I said, because after we presented to the president and, the rulers of Dubai and everyone else at the, what was it called? Expo 2020, Dubai Expo 2020. I went up to him and the president said, go and speak to Ibrahim Patel.
Oh, wow.
Then I went up to him and I said, look, this is what we're trying to do. And he said, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I'll see, what support the department can provide. And then an introduction was made to, the IDC. We went through their process. The IDC was then able to fund. And so you can see how being part of these accelerators and, coming out at the other end as an eminent participant who has done certain things quite well, puts you in the room where you can have these discussions about what you're trying to achieve. And therefore, when you now approach the funders, it comes with, a track record of this is what we're able to do. We've gone through structured programs. We've presented our case. Our deck makes sense. Our business model makes sense. It's been tested. The same applies for the Climate Finance Accelerator. We went through a very rigorous process, and traveled quite a bit to be able to actually deliver our message to those stakeholders. So we were very, very prepared. That's the point around that. We're extremely prepared. And when we were rejected, we accepted it for what it was. We were rejected because potentially the funder doesn't have capital at this point in time, doesn't meet their mandate or outside of their mandate. The funder is taking an alternative view about the market we're in to the one that we have. So it's, we didn't lose too much sleep over the no's. What we really tried to do is make sure that we had as few of them as possible and we focused on the ones that were ultimately going to say yes.
Sure. You mentioned your business model made sense. Did you have a lot of changes in your business model over the years?
So we like to think about pivoting as if you have enough evidence and data to support a pivot, you must pivot. But if you pivot too many times, you're going to go around in circles. So be very careful of that. So we haven't pivoted too much. We haven't pivoted away from the fundamentals. And the fundamentals is exactly that, serving customers, energy independence for everyone. We have a software, hardware, and financing stack. These are the segments we're targeting: residential and light commercial. Commercial is something that's becoming a big part of our business. And we do that in a way supported by the tech that we build internally, and make sure that it supports a great customer experience. So we're very deliberate about it. So we haven't pivoted away from that too much. So we don't like to pivot away. We like to introduce new things and see how they stack up relative to what we're already doing. And because we also run an idea meritocracy where when those things filter as information, we decide if we're going to, investigate further, introduce, co-opt, or do something else. And certain things that we've done, right? So we're a big player now in the payments space without saying that we're now a payments company. But we're a big player, big enough because of how in certain markets customers pay us. They pay us daily, right?
They pay us via your platform.
Exactly.
Okay.
On a daily basis. That
that makes you a payment player. Yeah.
See, and that's the way we think about it. So
you're actually a fintech.
100%.
Okay.
That's exactly how, because the way our business is structured is there's an EPC and a technology company, and then you have a financing company, which finances everything and owns the assets.
You keep on mentioning you want to lower the cost. And when it comes to electricity, customers seem to be very price inelastic. They don't want the cost of electricity to go up, even if it's by 100 rand. Customers will pay 1,000 rand for electricity and complain, but will pay 2,000 rand for dinner and not complain. In creating the business model, okay, so I'm guessing you're always trying to lower the cost, with everything that you do. Now, one of the things that you do is you import a lot because you need solar panels. So a lot of things are not in your control. So, which means you have to sort of pass on costs to customers. How are you navigating the two? How are you managing the cost so that you don't pass on the cost to customers, because then they'll complain and then you'll actually not do what you promised them?
It's a fantastic question, and it's one, interestingly, we have never really grappled with.
Okay.
And the reason why we don't grapple with it, because it's in our DNA. So saving customer money is in our DNA. It's why we exist. So because it's why we exist, we also accept that there's a cost that this business incurs in order to make sure that we save customers money. Should the customer pay for that? 100%.
Okay.
The customer must pay for that cost. However, net, right? The net effect of that is that the customer saves more money by using us as a business that delivers that. So it's a fundamental thing. It's table stakes. And what I mean by that is there's a cost of service, and there's a cost for us to serve the customer, which we bear. Then there's a cost associated with the things that I have mentioned, like AI mode, right? Which we build. We build on behalf of the customer. We don't build it for ourselves. We build it on behalf of the customer. We incur a cost upfront in order for it to be available. We then deliver it to a customer. That then saves the customer more money than what we ask them to pay us for doing that. So they're paying for the innovation. They're paying for the team of engineers that sits and deals with that issue and finds the most valuable solution for them. So I think from a fairness perspective, we think that's fair. But we go at the extra mile when it comes to how we negotiate from a cost perspective with our suppliers. As I mentioned at some point when we were chatting earlier, we have very intimate relationships with our suppliers, and we try to minimize the number of suppliers we have because the co-creation of certain aspects and features that the customer ends up receiving takes place in that negotiation where we inform the tech. So the product that's delivered from China is one that we have worked on with the original equipment manufacturer together. And it's an exclusive utility product. Then there are certain products as well that we assemble locally, such as our cabinet, and reticulate locally, which is our cabinet. The cabinet is important because it standardizes solutions. and makes the solution safe, easy to deploy at scale. And so those things we do, and we're very cost conscious and sensitive. And ultimately the goal is the customer should be better off today because they're using a system from us than they would be if they were not using a system from us and if they were using any other system.
Okay.
That's the ultimate goal. And that, I think, those are sort of the returns, or the return that we expect as a business, which we believe is fair. And we're not and we're not ashamed of the fact that we spend a lot of money building those things, making them viable and ones that customers like to adopt.
Do you think it's possible for every house, every home in South Africa to have solar?
I'm actually wondering why not.
Okay. And do you think it would be cheaper?
It would definitely be cheaper. And that's the responsibility we have. Right? And that's the thing we are ultimately solving for is if you don't have it already, why not? Right. And part of it is customer education, advocacy, how you then, prove to the customer that we're doing it in a customer-centric manner. You have nothing to worry about. This is how we're going to do it. So that's what our business really has to solve for as well, is every home should. Every home that can, should. Every home that doesn't have solar panels or a solar system from Wetility or any other provider should benefit from the fact that other homes have that, or should benefit from utility scale plants that are more affordable than carbon, or let's call it base load power plants.
So then, Vincent, we need that commitment that you put out there. You said 1 million homes. Then we need it to be 5 million, 10 million.
So it's interesting because we made that commitment, and I look at some of the companies in the world, or even South African ones, that have made commitments like that. And I am envious of how bold they are when they do it. But before you start solving the problem, it sounds daunting. It sounds crazy. When we look at it now, it's not that crazy an idea. It's actually a fairly standard thing to aim for. On our way, on the path. How soon we get there is really up to the question that you asked previously, is what's stopping homeowners? What's stopping businesses from doing it? And most of it has to do with anxiety and the consumer or the customer education leg not catching up to where ourselves as industry participants believe we should be. But ultimately we can get there. I mean, there are, 16 million households in South Africa. Interestingly, I think about 3.5 million of those are in informal settlement, I believe. And the balance are in the mix of that. 85% of all households are freehold, 15% a sectional title. So you can see that and then think about, okay, there are multiple ways to get to that. And I think there's concerted effort from our side, I believe, to really get to that 1 million home mark.
In 10 years.
Yeah, I think so. I think that might be too long.
Yeah, I think it's too long. Based on what you're saying, I think you can do way more.
Too long, but we're working hard at it. And yeah, we'll get there. That's my strong belief. We'll get there. And it's evidence-based. There's a lot that we're doing that gets us there.
And any plans to expand into the rest of Africa?
So that 1 million home includes the rest of it.
No, Vincent.
Look, we view the rest of Southern Africa as a market that we are supposed to be in at this point.
Yes.
5.5 years later, the fact that we were still trying to get there is problematic for us, but we're solving that. I think we've taken the right approach in terms of the investment we've made in branching out into the rest of Southern Africa. And we've picked the markets where we believe we will be successful. So in the next 6 months, it'll be, we will be in those markets. I said the next 6 months, 6 months ago. But it's complicated when you enter markets outside of ones that are in that sort of common monetary area. And that would be your South Africa, your Namibia, and whatnot. So the markets we're looking at are outside of that initially.
Okay. And it's complicated because of regulations.
It mostly has to do with regulation, to your
Okay.
point. Tax is a big one. Where your funds come from, and how you make that feasible is super important. Because with our model, as I said, it's capital intensive. So when we enter that market, we don't want to enter with a stripped or a significantly stripped down version of what we do for the sake of just entering a market. We enter a market where we believe we can gain significant share and we can win. If we can't gain significant share and can't win, there's really no value in us entering the market.
And how low do you really think the cost of power could get to? So rand value.
So it's a difficult one for me to answer, because I think generally utility services are going to continue being inflated.
Okay.
So there's this common notion now that as the cost of renewable energy equipment, particularly panels and batteries, continues to get lower, then the delivered cost of power must also follow suit. But those are components that form part of a broader, package of goods that is eventually delivered. So labor it's not getting cheaper.
Yes.
Other components are not necessarily getting cheaper. So you have to take that in that context. I think the rate at which those prices escalate or increase is obviously lowered by the fact that the primary components are getting cheaper. 100%. I agree with that. I think the gap is widening between utility or grid power or the levelized cost of power from the traditional grid, which is renewables, and then you have your own embedded generator. So that gap is widening, and I think it will continue to widen for quite some time. But there will be inflation across those different aspects, and it's just the way you have to think about how the economics of utilitarian or utility services actually works. But what we are trying to do is to make sure that inflation or that inflationary impact is lessened, and that's the lowest cost aspect of that.
Maybe what would help is for you to tell us what's the lowest cost one of your customers is currently paying. Yeah.
So we have customers that are off grid.
Okay.
Using our system, and
yes. So what's the lowest?
So we have customers that are paying $1,499
a month.
That is good.
That are paying that much. How those customers find themselves in this off-grid situation is they decided to get a solar system from us.
Yes.
Then they decided to stop using power from the grid. AI mode kicked in, which further optimized that and got them to a point where, under certain conditions, they go every day without power from the grid.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I come from the diesel generator business. That was my last job. And I used to work at Cummins. Cummins has evolved, so I don't want to label them the diesel generator people or the diesel engine people anymore. They've become a real hybrid power technologies business that's also doing some interesting things in the renewable space and in the battery energy storage system space. But that's where I come from. And the definition of off-grid, that we typically used to use was you should go for at least 72 to 96 sort of hours power from your own source, uninterrupted, consuming power the way you would normally. But we've seen it with our customers where they're just going every day and they continue to.
Sure.
So yeah, that's testament to the product team and what they spend their time doing.
Yes.
They really spend their time making sure that it's optimal, that the system that a customer has, the plant that a customer has is optimal.
You were talking about expansion, and you mentioned you're ready to spread your wings. Do you have enough skills to match that growth? Because with solar, it seems like new technology coming into the country. So is there a skills shortage?
So we we like to staff people based on competency.
Okay.
So the industry veil with which people like to at least think about recruitment, we believe is actually not the right one.
Okay.
And why we say this is there are certain parts of our business, 100%, where if you're in product and operations, chances are you have some sort of experience. But if you have engineering experience, for example, electrical, or you have mechanical engineering experience, have done some things in the chemical engineering or industrial engineering space, and you're fresh out of university, we're likely to look at you more positively than an engineer with many years of experience is potentially in the power space because of just recency and what we believe the young engineer can bring to the table who's fresh out of university versus one who says, I'm an expert in this particular space because I've been in it for so many years. Then in customer-facing roles,
And why is that?
It's something I probably learned at Cummins. So Cummins had a great graduate engineer program where they went and, fetched the most talented engineers they could find from universities in South Africa. And they went through a 24-month intense, graduate engineering program where they learned sales and learned a variety of things. And when I look at the career trajectories of some of those engineers today versus the ones that came from somewhere else, the ones that were part of their graduate engineering program are doing exceedingly well because they have been taught the right ways of work for the industry that they're in. Now. So we believe that's the investment we have to make. So once in a while, we do have, deep discussions about there's a vacuum or there's a gap and we need to find experienced people of this nature.
Yes.
And what we've tended to do is we've then gone and said, well, we now have a responsibility to go and find the next best tier and train them to be what we want them to be. So, I think next week, 20 years graduates are joining us. We've always had graduates last year, a quarter of half of that, 10 previous year was 5. And we were looking at the quality of the graduates that we're getting this year, even better quality. But we've gone out and been very specific about who we're looking for and why we're trying to attract them, but mostly engineering skills. And then customer-facing roles have a lot to do with people skills, more than, deep sector experience. The rest you can teach. You can teach people your product. You can teach them how your product works. You can teach them how to engage internally, how to be an effective team member. You can teach them how to use tools and systems, and that stuff you should invest in. If you're a business and you take your people seriously, you should invest in that, and you should have the right people delivering that learning or that mentoring, and it must be a dedicated program. So one of our co-founders, Chifiwa, is very dedicated to that. And I look at some of the interns who are now engineers, some of them are now senior engineers, who always say that Chifiwa's investment in their development was fundamental.
Wow.
Then once in a while, people leave. And when people leave, you should feel proud of what you have contributed to their life, and you should wish them well.
Yeah.
And it's a thing which I also believe it's your contribution to society.
Yeah.
And you should make sure that your funnel and your way of doing things is also very hard to beat, and your ability to retain the people that you're afraid are going to leave should also improve. So you should be evolving as a business such that people don't want to leave because they enjoy their work and they believe that the investment that you've made in them is also future fit for your own business. So I think we should develop a balanced view on the skills shortage and what it actually means. I think there are enough graduates in South Africa, enough graduates who have learned a variety of things for whatever reason that they've learned those things. There's an opportunity to get them at a very young age or at a very young age in their careers and retrain and repurpose them to do what we believe needs to be done, and follow the trends with regards to where the markets are going, and also just structured programs that are also supported by the right bodies, right? If we're saying that AI engineering is going to be super important and we're building AI data centers, then we should be taking people along that journey. Because you've heard about this, right? A lot of people learned how to code themselves.
Yes.
Right? They didn't go to school and study computer science or maths or engineering. They just learned how to code.
Yeah.
Why? Because that's where the job market was going. And that's where they saw opportunities for them to grow. Some of those coders who learned to code themselves can stand toe to toe with anyone who went through a structured program where they learned to code. So if you think about that analogy and then say, what if we invested in a structured product that teaches non-coders to code? We would be, well advanced in terms of that. So that's the perspective that we take. And I'm very proud of what our team has achieved, because when I look at the demographic makeup of our team, it's representative of the society we live in, by and large.
Wow.
Young Black South Africans form a broad base of our team. You have, people from diverse backgrounds. You have a few international expats that, form that team. And if you look at our team and just how diverse it is, and even across, just from a gender specific thing, very deliberate. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we do it at a point where you can't come and say, well, people of a certain demographic are not experienced. Because they're all graduates, right? So what do you mean they're not experienced? You didn't invest in teaching the people to be experienced. Therefore, you now have a problem. I think that's a responsibility that we take very, very seriously, and are investing even more in making sure that it's just at a minimum representative of the society we live in.
Are there any opportunities for small entrepreneurs to plug into your ecosystem or to partner with Wetility?
Yes, there are. I think over and above the 100 plus people that we have that work for Wetility in permanent and strict contract on strict contract basis, we have several subcontractors because we use the subcontractors to install. Though the subcontractors sit in a finite number of entities because of our strict adherence to certain quality controls and quality standards. But those those entities are small, there's SMEs in their own right, and it's young entrepreneurs in most cases that go out and actually install our systems. So those are the significant opportunities from our perspective. I think there are other things now where, as a business of our size, we are now starting to look at sort of acquisitive activities in the market, where if there's interesting technology that we need to be aware of, that's locally developed, is novel, doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, needs further development or the support of a Wetility or some other players in our industry, then we'll also look at those. But our base has a lot of installers, a lot of service teams on the operation and maintenance side that come from just where we come from. That's important.
And then tech skills?
Tech skills, the installers are technicians. So in order to be a Wetility certified installer, you need to be a Red Seal or an electrician that can issue a COC. Engineering skills as well. Some of these entities are run by engineers. The larger ones particularly are run by people with deep engineering skills. So that we do. We've taken a lot of individuals through certain programs, though temporary, who come from some of the TVETs who have qualified. And then we take them through a program, and then after 6 months, we either offer them role with us, or we try and place them with some of our installers so that they can find meaningful work. We're also looking at branching into the communities where our customers are and utilizing skills and resources from within those communities. So, it sounds crazy, but, having an engineer fly to certain parts of South Africa to do work that is standard for us doesn't make sense. Doesn't sit well with us in terms of just the responsibility we have to uplift communities around us in a meaningful way, not in a CSR, here's a donation kind of way, but in a meaningful way that says here's sustainable employment over a sustained period, and you can build a future around that. And then it's other things, right, that often not spoken about that companies are allowed to get away with. And I'm not saying this to shame any company or whatnot, because circumstances vary, but it's things like not offering people permanent employment when you can.
Yes.
And what it actually means for that individual. They can't get credit, they can't buy a house.
Yeah.
Sometimes, credit checks, remember, also go as far as the type of school your children can go to.
Yeah.
Because they're not allowed, because they don't have a permanent contract. And being sensitive to those things from an employment perspective is important. But also, we also try and make sure even the subcontractors are sustainable. We've, cut relationships with certain subcontractors, not because we didn't like them, because they were not going to get to a sustainable level where they can continue to do what they're doing if an investment wasn't made. So we can only invest up to a certain point, but they also need to invest in upskilling themselves and also have alternative ways of investing in certain things. And once you get to a point where you realize there's no growth, the best thing sometimes you can do is to say, this is not going to end well for you or for us if you continue down this path. So maybe, find another trade. And I think it's just making sure that everything we do has a sustained effect over a long period of time.
And as the CEO of Wetility, what keeps you awake at night currently?
So I think what really keeps me awake at night is how much more I can save customers money and the investments we're making and whether or not they align with that view. So that really, really keeps me up at night, and I'm quite pedantic about that. And I spend a lot of time with the teams that are working on those pieces of work to make sure that they fully understand how to deliver it and how to make sure that it makes a lot of sense. I think the rate at which the market is growing, although it's growing faster than any other market, I believe, in South Africa, doesn't make me feel satisfied, because to your point around how do we get to that 1 million homes mark quickly, I believe it's almost a no-brainer. So that also keeps me up at night. So are we doing enough to educate customers about the benefits of, doing what we do, and how we can make it seamless for them? So that definitely keeps me up at night. The amount of capital we need to get to the number you're talking about definitely keeps me up at night, but in a positive way, because the capital markets, or the providers of capital, both in equity and debt perspective, have been fair to us. And there's a lot of capital in South Africa and globally that's dedicated to what we do. So it's really about us showing up, performing exceedingly well, and then being able to have those conversations, of which the business and the how we're doing right now gives me great comfort. But something that you have to be concerned about is the amount of capital that's required in order for us to get to that point. So I think those are the primary ones that really, really keep me up at night.
And what do you say to the people that say your offering is not cheap enough?
I take it on the chin.
Okay.
And I go back and speak to Ikena, Chief Product Officer, speak to the engineering teams, speak to myself, and sit and say, can we do more? And it's one that we have to consistently think about. But we also like to take a spin on that word and say valuable. Is our product valuable enough?
Valuable.
Yeah, so it has to be valuable. It has to be, because there are lots of products that you can get that are cheap. And I think a lot of people are learning lessons from the euphoric nature that that engulfed our industry in 2022 and 2023 and maybe 2021 to some extent. And lots of bad decisions were made, and people went and bought any cheap thing they could buy. And now it's giving you issues. You have nowhere to claim the warranties. The installer that you used now told you that 2024 was a tough year, and now I'm a plumber. So you have to think about that in the context of value. And I think we always are striving to make sure that it's lowest cost, or it's affordable, and that it's high value, high impact as well.
Well, thank you for staying up at night thinking about how you can save us costs I think the cost of electricity is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's scary to think that it's going to get worse. So it's quite exciting to hear that, you know, people like Wetility are staying up all night thinking about how to help us and how to really make our homes run more efficiently. So we thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lungelo.
And good luck with everything else that you're doing. I think you are doing a fantastic job.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on the podcast. And I wish you all the best. And I am going to hold you to that 1 million customer celebration party.
Yes.
Whenever it happens.
Thank you.
So.